You're listening to the Mindset Advantage podcast with Elliot Rowe and Dr. Tricia Gardner.
So, welcome to the show. Tricia, what have you got for us this week?
Well, I wanted to go over just two quick things. Both have to do with reader questions. First, I did get a message back. Remember a while back we had answered a question from a guy who wanted to know about not drinking at the table?
Oh, yeah.
Well, he sent me a message saying that he has stopped drinking at the table for the last few sessions, and he is up on those sessions. So I think it's making a real difference for him.
Perfect. Great to hear he took that advice there.
Absolutely. And second, I got in a new question this week, and I'm just going to kind of paraphrase it. But basically, this is an MTT player, and he is transitioning and playing a lot more cash, but he is finding the losses in cash harder to deal with than, say, the losses at MTTs. So I thought we could discuss that for a couple minutes.
Okay, it's quite an interesting one. Often people find it more difficult the other way around. What could be happening here is in a cash game, sometimes there's more ego involved because you're playing against those same people at the table, and it can become a little bit more personal, and you can buy back in. And if you keep buying back in, it can become very expensive from that side, where often a lot of times, if you're in an MTT, you've decided to spend X amount of money. You bought into the MTT. Once you're out, you're out. There's not always another option there. So it could be one of those factors playing out. What are your thoughts, Tricia?
Yeah, I really have a lot of agreement with you. But one thing I do want to make our listeners aware of is that the brain is primed for something called loss aversion. And that means that a loss is twice as painful as a win feels good, if that makes sense. So I think it's kind of like you said, when you bought into the tournament, well, you know, it's whatever the buy-in was, and that's it. But in a cash game, you're losing, cold, hard cash. And that really triggers that loss aversion in the brain. So as far as the brain is concerned, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. So losses feel extra painful. And I think if you don't know that going in, whenever you do have those losses, it can really impact you just a lot more strongly.
And it may also be that he's got used to the variance of MTTs and the fact that often, obviously with MTTs and the number of players, you don't cash. But a lot of the time people will sit down at a cash table, they'll look at their opponents and they'll think, I'm the strongest player here, I'm going to be leaving with money, and they've got that sense of entitlement. But even the best players in the world don't always leave the table with the most money. Sometimes the cards just go against you. So there might be an entitlement thing. If that's part of the issue, certainly really try and see this as a year-long game rather than a daily variance. Look at your annual variance, look to be making the right decisions over the year to make that return over the year rather than expect a return on your money every single session, because unfortunately the game just doesn't work like that.
Yeah, I think it's really, you have to understand yourself, and you have to understand what's driving you and what's motivating you. And you have to really be aware of the ego, as you brought up, and just kind of your thought processes, and understand that in poker, whether it's MTTs or cash, there's going to be a whole lot of losing going on.
Yeah, even if you're excellent. So good luck out there to that player, and hopefully have a think over those things. Try and have an idea of which one that's causing the issue, and really look to work through that and have that new understanding so that it's not quite so painful. So this week on the show, we've got Sean Kapul. He's a PLO player and coach, and he's going to be coming on to talk about playing PLO and also the sort of the poker nomad lifestyle of traveling the world whilst playing poker. So let's give Sean a call. So Sean, welcome to the show. If you could introduce yourself to our listeners.
Hi, yeah. Thank you for having me on, first of all. My name is Sean. I've been a PLO professional for the last 7 years and have been living abroad pretty much that entire time, mostly in Buenos Aires. And in addition to playing mid to high stakes PLO now, I help good no limit players transition over successfully to PLO cash games where they can achieve higher win rates and make more money.
That is a great opener, and it makes me think, gosh, there's so many things we can ask you. But why don't we start off with the fact that you've lived abroad for at least 7 years? How did that come about, and kind of what's the experience been like?
Yeah, it's been a fun ride so far, and I actually hope it continues for quite a bit longer. But it started when I was playing poker through college, university, kind of that usual story, and wasn't sure if I was going to try and be a professional, but kind of hearing stories of friends who had graduated earlier than I had, who were a bit older than me, and like hearing them complain about their jobs and how boring it was and like just nonstop. I kind of thought there had to be more to life and enjoying life than that. So that kind of drove me, along with making a nice score in a tournament in Las Vegas in my last year of school. It kind of provided me a cushion to make that leap and decide, I'll try this. So I bought a one-way ticket to Buenos Aires, Argentina, thinking, yeah, I'll travel around, see how this like playing professional poker thing goes. And I had some money banked away, which was, provided that nice cushion for me. And from there, I kind of never looked back. My plan was to travel through South America, but I loved Buenos Aires so much that I decided to set up shop there. And yeah, for the last 7 years, I've probably spent about 5 of those years there.
Wow.
And when sort of poker player goes to a new city, was it very much going straight into the poker community that was there? Or is that something that you found over the years? How does it work from that side?
Yeah, for me, I was fortunate. There was a smallish poker community in Buenos Aires at the time. And then I had read up and contacted a few people, and they hosted weekly dinners. They had like a dinner club. It wasn't that the community was so big that it was kind of like too much. So the dinners would tend to be between like 6 and 10 people kind of thing. Because I went to Buenos Aires not knowing anybody. I knew a few people who had studied abroad there and recommended it and all that, which is how I decided on that city. But like before I actually was planning the trip and all that, I wasn't too nervous. And then when I was sitting on the plane, like as the engines turned on and all that, I was just like, holy shit, like what am I doing?
And one of the interesting things there is that so many of the poker players we hear from who live abroad, it's because of Black Friday. But you actually made that decision before Black Friday, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. And then once the news kind of hit, it just kind of solidified the plan and path that I was on.
Did you feel like a major genius because you were already, out of the country when Black Friday hit?
Yeah, I guess I was a few steps ahead of the game in regards to that. So I wasn't, scrambling to figure out what I was going to do for a living. There was like that moment of panic when like you try to log into your PokerStars account and you have this like DOJ message.
Right.
But then like once the fallout kind of was done and funds were recovered, it was kind of like business as usual for me, at least. And I know a lot of players probably have struggled with that. And a lot of them probably weren't comfortable enough to go travel abroad or move abroad to continue their dream to be a professional poker player, which is pretty unfortunate, I think.
Yeah, and I think there is a big difference between someone who's gone to live in another country because it was their choice and the other guys who they've gone to live there because they can't play poker in America and they've almost been forced out of the country. I think it does create a different mindset around it.
Yeah, totally. And to feel like, well, I guess most players, when Black Friday hit, moved to Mexico or Canada, the players from the US. Yeah, the feeling that you don't genuinely want to be there as compared to your hometown or whatever it is. Yeah, it's got to affect you on a day-to-day basis, I would think.
Now, being, outside of the country for so long, how has that been in terms of like, have you picked up a lot of additional languages? Have you just, had cultural experiences that have been, pretty amazing? I imagine you have.
Yeah, so I speak Spanish fluently at this point. I can't roll my R like most gringos can still. But outside of that, yeah, my Spanish is pretty good. And yeah, I mean, living abroad and playing poker, if you do it right, provides you with more free time and the freedom to like be wherever and do whatever you want. So I've gotten into a few different hobbies over the years, boxing being one of them. I learned to scuba dive, which is really amazing to me. And yeah, just kind of, I'm able to go through life a little slower and not feel like I'm rushed from point A to point B which again is just like a huge benefit to playing poker professionally.
Making the most of the balanced lifestyle, isn't it? The opportunity to do that.
Exactly. Whereas if all these people, well, not all these people, but like some professional players just have poker to stand on, it's like one pillar or one leg of a chair. And if that's not going well, like their whole life kind of crumbles. But like you mentioned, the balancing, I think is really important, especially for a job as stressful and chaotic as poker can be a lot of times. I think it's really good to have that balance.
And that's one of the things, you've come on, you're a PLO player, how do you find that difference from No Limit when it comes to the mental game? Because obviously, those bad times in PLO are going to come a lot because the variance is so much higher.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I've struggled with it at times when you're going through like 6-figure downswings. But yeah, I mean, the variance in PLO, even though the win rates are higher, the variance is pretty nuts. And I'm actually sometimes jealous of these No Limit guys' graphs that's just like steady Eddie, up and up and up, and the EV line just tracks the actual winnings. Whereas like PLO is just like a sine wave graph kind of sometimes.
Now, you take good No Limit Hold'em players and you can like transform them into good PLO players. Do you have kind of a system for that? And if so, what is it?
It's work in progress still, but yeah, I try and get them up to speed as quick as possible first and try and get them focused on the situations that come up most often. So instead of getting them thinking about like 3-bet range versus range situations, it's like slow it down a little bit because that kind of stuff will come. But yeah, I mean, focusing on the fundamentals of like what they need to be opening or flatting or 3-betting pre-flop, what proper defending ranges are, what like are situations where you need to be raising versus flatting, and then situations where you're kind of the pre-flop opener and then you're playing a pot in position, which is where you're making the most money on a situational basis. So again, I'm focusing on that and kind of tell them to not worry so much about the more complicated things right away, especially because if you're good at No Limit in 2016, like your poker theory is at a really, really high level right now. And so you'll be able to kind of intuitively figure out a lot of these like range versus range kind of situations and things related to that. So yeah, I try and get them up to speed as quick as possible and then kind of fine tune the little details and nuances that are different between the two games.
And in terms of sort of advice to them when they see the first sort of realities of variance of PLO, what sort of advice do you give them?
I guess to be like a boxer and kind of stay in the pocket,
Roll with the punches.
Yeah, it's like if you're in a boxing match and like expect to never get hit, it just won't end up that way. So you kind of have to brace yourself for it. And that said, like the higher your win rate is, the lower the variance becomes, the lower the downswings are. So that's what I kind of try and hammer home to guys who are switching over.
This might sound like a weird question, but do you think there's a certain personality type that does well in PLO?
That's a good question. It's not something I've thought of.
Yeah, I was just kind of wondering because based off the way you're describing it, it seems to me like it's not too far-fetched to think that maybe there are certain personality types who would do a little better with this game, and maybe there's certain personality types who should stay far, far away from it.
I think that's definitely the case.
I would agree with that. I would say if you kind of have tilt control issues or like you lose a couple of buy-ins and then like the floodgates open for you when you're playing No Limit, I would suggest not making the switch if that's the case. But if you're comfortable with the variance of poker, you've been a pro for a while, you've seen it all, been through it all, and you have a bankroll sufficient to handle those swings, then PLO might be something you want to explore.
And just over your career, those 7 years, what sort of successes have you seen?
So I guess before I was even titled a professional poker player, I mentioned in the introduction or shortly thereafter that I had a nice tournament score in Las Vegas in 2008, which kind of tipped the scales to me going pro. So I played the main event, busted the first day, and wanted to get the hell out of Las Vegas. but I was with my friend who was playing like a different day on the main event. And so I found there was a $1,000 tournament at the Venetian. And I was like, well, okay, well, might as well go there. And ended up getting second place in that for right around $50,000. And that kind of leapfrogged me into the path that I'm on now. And
so were you like 21 or 22 at the time? Something like that?
22 at the time, and not one of those like college poker prodigy dropout type kids. So I was kind of taking my bumps along the way during college. And, I'd saved a little bit and made some money from it, but by no means some, poker baller at 21, some genius kid or anything like that.
And then how were you able to parlay that into, what was like the actual process? Because I know we have people listening who are thinking maybe they had a good score, and how do they get to Buenos Aires?
Well, you buy a one-way ticket and figure it out as you go. I know it's kind of a straightforward answer, but it really is like you just kind of have to do something. When there's a lot of unknowns, you just kind of need to, like, instead of having this analysis paralysis kind of thing happen to you, I think it's better to just take a step or two steps forward and figure it out. Especially if you're kind of a problem solver type, which poker players are, you can figure out what's going on quickly and better than other people, I think. And you'll find your footing if you want to go explore some uncharted territory.
And if you don't like it, you can fly home.
Yeah.
So not always a huge risk that people sometimes worry about. And just thinking about sort of how your career has gone over those years, how important has the mental game been to your success at the tables?
Yeah, it's been beyond massive, honestly, because thinking back over my career, like mentioning those PLO swings, like I've had tough times over my career with it that like kept me out of poker for extended stretches of time. And had my mental game been kind of sharper in those days, I think it would have kept me in the game in times where, I had left for a month or something like that. And now, fast forward to 2016, it's like you didn't even know you were aware of like what was going on behind the scenes. But now I know like there's a need for a proper warm up to be in like a good state of mind, to be able to take a step back, like pull yourself out of your own head for a second and see where you're at, like with your focus levels, concentration, energy. Like if you're towards the end of a long session and some 25-50 starting to run, but like it's a good spot, maybe not the best spot, but you're kind of like winding down, you don't have much left in the tank mentally, let's say, it's probably not the best time to jump into a game like that. Earlier in my career, I didn't realize this or grasp it.
So interesting that you bring that up, because I think some people really discount the importance of things like focus and concentration and energy management and all that. And it's so interesting to hear you say, if you would have paid attention to those factors long ago and far away, it could have potentially have added quite a bit of money to your bottom line.
Yeah, definitely. Like without question. And yeah, not just the session to session thing, but again, like being able to consistently play day in, day out at a high level, focused and energetic.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned the boxing. Has that helped you in terms of those energy levels at the table? Yeah, because obviously boxing's serious on your fitness.
Yeah, well, maybe this is the way that I deal with the variance of PLO is by like punching stuff and getting hit in the head. But yeah, no, I've found it to be a great, well, I really enjoy it first and foremost, but I've found it to be a really good release of energy. So you kind of like this pent up stuff from poker, and being able to kind of go to the gym and do some sparring or do some drills and bag work and things like that has been really positive for me. And I mean, I know you guys have harped on this all the time, but exercise in general, any sort of thing that you do where you're moving and build up a sweat is going to be good for you mentally. And yeah, with the boxing, it's the same for me. So like I come back tired from the gym, but the next day I'm re-energized. Like it provides me like this sustainable kind of energy. It's one of the pillars for me. So I have like the poker pillar and then the, meditation as well, boxing, exercise, all those kinds of things to keep me kind of balanced and steady in my career at this point.
The research is very clear on it that exercise acts almost as a little bit of Ritalin and a little bit of Prozac, meaning that exercise improves focus, and Ritalin is the medication that's used for ADHD for people who don't know, or ADD. And Prozac is an antidepressant, and exercise actually is, in many cases, as effective as an antidepressant. So if you want to feel good, you got to get in your exercise.
That doesn't mean you can take half a Ritalin and half a Prozac.
No, it doesn't.
Forget about your running. And what advice would you have for guys who are struggling with their mental game?
Well, the cheap option, I would say, is to go get a book on the mental game. There's a few out there in the market that I would highly recommend. And then working with either of you, like I've been working with you, Elliot, for almost 2 years now.
Yeah, it's a good amount of time.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, the benefits have been massive for me, like both in and out of poker. But I think in general, like you have to be willing to change and be open to having a difficult conversation with yourself as well. That, maybe the way you're doing things isn't the best way to go about it, and changing something in your own style or approach might be necessary. And that's difficult, like you've gotten this far in life probably pretty successfully. And to realize that you maybe need to make some tweaks or changes can be pretty hard.
Yeah, it's actually something really interesting you brought that up. I definitely notice a lot more resistance from the sort of the pre-Black Friday generation of poker players. On an average, when I'm talking to people around taking things more professionally, exercising, studying, all of those things. And I think it's because it was so different before Black Friday. And they had a lot of people had a lot of success without doing that much work off the table. And there's definitely some resistance some of the times when I'm talking to that generation of players, explaining, this is how you make money now. And, I'll get from a lot of guys, well, I didn't used to have to do that. And it's something that you really should be aware of if you're listening and you are of that generation of players and you still aren't studying and you are smoking weed whilst you're playing, or you're not doing any exercise and all of those things. You really will make a lot more money if you do follow all of this advice.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I was one of those stubborn people.
I remember. Know, not so much. You weren't too bad.
Not too bad.
You're not. Yeah. You're not.
Like I know I was like, study. I don't really like it. But then I realized the importance and the impact that it had once I started to do it on a schedule. And yeah, obviously poker gets harder and harder every week. And putting yourself in a position to win before you sit at the tables, I think is a key going forward.
Yeah, we had Tommy Angelo on a while back, and he talked about how when you're at the poker table, there's so many things that are not in your control, that why wouldn't you do the things that are under your total control, like the exercise, sleep, diet, all that sort of stuff. And it sounds like you're very much in agreement with that sort of ideology.
Yeah, totally. And it's not just for poker. I think it's just to lead a healthier, more balanced, fun lifestyle as well.
Yeah, none of those things will hurt the other parts of your life, that's for sure. Good sleep, exercise, meditation. And sort of over those years, all these poker players you've met and games you've played, what's the craziest tilt that you've seen at the tables or witnessed when your friends or you've been at the computer?
I was living in a poker house earlier in Buenos Aires with 2 other guys. And yeah, there was one guy who was playing a session. Me and my friend were kind of just hanging out in the house. And we kind of saw him had his headphones on, grinding away, and just starting to kind of hammer fist his own forehead, punching himself in the head. And we kind of looked at each other and were like, uh-oh. And 40 seconds later, obviously he was having a pretty rough session. But yeah, less than a minute later, he just like slams his headphones down, runs over to the wall, and starts like throwing uppercuts and hooks at the wall. And we just stood there in like a shock with our mouths wide open, not sure like what the hell was going on. So the punching lasted maybe 10 seconds or so. He storms off, and we kind of look at the wall, and there was just like blood on the wall from
Mm.
his knuckles. So I would say the wall won that confrontation. And that's probably the craziest like live tilt that I've ever seen.
Is he still playing, or do you know?
Yeah, he's still a professional poker player and a good one as well. I think those issues are much more under control as
Right,
well.
right. I think it'd be very difficult to have a long-term career if you were doing that consistently.
Yeah, and it's not like he was doing this consistently, but it just that one time he just kind of let loose on the wall.
Hopefully, lesson was learned. So.
Yeah, I'd say so.
And if people want to find out about your coaching, well, first off, what sort of players do you think would benefit the most from it? What would you say you'd be looking for in a client?
I would be looking for good no limit players, so someone who's had success either as a semi-pro or full-on professional, probably playing no limit 200 or above. I've worked with guys, from 100 up to like nosebleed guys switching over. So yeah, those guys with the like pretty high, who come already with a high level of poker theory and general like poker ability, I'd say, that they've developed over the years. I can get them up to speed with PLO and like how the game is in 2016 a lot faster.
Excellent. And where can they find out about you?
So my coaching, if you'd like to find out more, is I have a website at www.plomastery.com.
Awesome. And what we'll do, we'll put a link to that on the page as well. So if anyone wants to click through and have a look at Sean's site, we'll put a link on the podcast page.
Great.
So master your PLO, guys. It's the name of the game.
Yes, it is.
Well, man, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really good fun hearing from you. Enjoy. I know we're actually talking to you from Japan at the moment, aren't we?
Yeah, I'm in the land of the rising sun. Yep.
Enjoy the poker lifestyle of traveling the world.
Yeah, eat some
amazing food.
Yeah, eat some sushi for me.
I will. I'll send you a picture of the next meal.
Awesome. I love food porn, so I'll be looking for that.
All right, I'll send it over.
Excellent. Well, cheers, Sean. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, anyone interested, the links will be on the podcast page.
All right, great.
So great to have Sean on the show. It was good to hear those differences there between PLO and No Limit and just the reality of the variance those guys have to face.
Oh my gosh, it's just such a roller coaster ride, you know?
Yeah, it's and when you see some of those graphs, you can understand. Certainly, roller coaster is the right word. The importance, as we go on so frequently, of that professional mindset of doing all of the things that you need to be doing off the table to give yourself that best chance when you sit down to play your session.
I like the way he said too, you can't get in a boxing ring and expect not to get hit. Like it just doesn't happen. And it's the same thing at poker. You can't sit down at the poker table and expect that you're not going to lose or you're not going to get a bad beat some of the time or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, it's an excellent analogy. So once you sit at the table, except you're in the ring, you're going to get punched. Right. If you play well enough, you'll come out the winner. And that's the key part here is really keeping the quality of your play up so that in that long term, over the year, you're the one winning the money. Those daily swings, those monthly swings don't need to be relevant if you manage to keep your play at a high standard and you do have that edge in the games.
And then also I picked up from him, like if you are going to transition, you really have to focus on the fundamentals. And it sounded like he was saying basically look at, and this is kind of the Pareto principle, which is where 20% of your inputs get you 80% of your outputs. And it sounded like he was really talking about that in terms of look for the fundamentals and get those down cold before you really worry about more high level stuff.
Definitely. If you can get the fundamentals in place, you're going to be making some money. Then you can worry about fine-tuning and the more difficult plays.
But interestingly enough, I think his attitude was pretty much that the mental game is massive, and that if he would have been sharper on his mental game earlier, he would have been a lot more profitable.
Yeah, and I think that's something lots of players realize as you do make those changes to your mental game, as you do all of these things. I think a lot of people have that sort of wow moment of, it's a shame this didn't come earlier, but obviously it's a good thing that they reached that stage.
Yeah, so guys, get after your mental game. It's really important.
Go make that money. So, so Trisha, if someone wants to get in contact with you, where do they find you?
You can go to my website, trishacardner.com, or you can follow me on Twitter at Dr. Trisha Cardner.
Excellent. And if any of you want to contact me through my website or try my MP3s, head to pokermindcoach.com. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, guys.
You've been listening to the Mindset Advantage podcast with Elliot Rowe and Dr. Trisha Cardner. To get any resources mentioned in the episode or to listen to past shows, visit pokermindcoach.com/TMA podcast. Thanks for listening.